This weekend, of course, we celebrate Divine Mercy Sunday, which is typically associated with today's Gospel. Also John chapter 20 and the story of Thomas, St. Thomas, Doubting Thomas. And I have to admit, I'm always uncomfortable with that particular title assigned to St. Thomas, Doubting Thomas, because it's kind of misleading, right? It gives the impression that his example is meant to be discouraged, whereas in reality, it's actually kind of the opposite. So at the very beginning of the story, obviously, it's in the aftermath of the resurrection. And what you hear is that the disciples, minus St. Thomas, are behind locked doors because of fear of the local authorities, right? So it's symbolic. It's emblematic of their collective shame and their sin and their fear, all these things which typically constitute barriers to intimacy and being in right relationship with God. And all of a sudden, Jesus Christ, he just cuts through all that stuff, appears in their midst and says, peace. Specifically, shalom, right? So it's a particular type of peace. So it's not simply a greeting, it's more of a statement of fact. So peace born from being in right relationship with God. So what he's saying to them in a certain sense is that, look, you are reconciled with God the Father. Not because of anything you've done, but because of everything I've done. I've suffered and died on the cross, I come back from the dead, and in my very being is the reconciliation of humanity and divinity. So, loosely translated, things are fine. As a result of which they rejoice. And they receive the gift of the Holy Spirit, and with that, the power to forgive sins. Wherever sins you forgive, they are forgiven, and wherever sins you retain, they are retained. Then Jesus Christ leaves. After Jesus Christ leaves, Thomas shows up, and maybe he's been grocery shopping or something. And he's like, hey, how was your day? Well, pretty good day. Guess what? Jesus Christ showed up. He's back from the dead. He said, things are fine. In response to which Thomas is like, unless I could see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger in those marks and put my hand in his side, I will not believe. In other words, I saw that guy die. And he wasn't just like a guy. He wasn't just our friend. He wasn't just our rabbi. He was the long-awaited Messiah. We are collectively the long-suffering people of God. You got to get in that mindset. The long-suffering people of God. They were waiting for this guy, the Messiah, who would make all things new. And this guy came, and no one's ever preached like this man. No one's ever done miracles like this man. It seemed to be he was the Messiah, but then all of a sudden he was captured by his enemies, the forces of evil, suffered this horrible death on the cross, and he died. And I remember that. And with his death, something in my heart died too. Because the Messiah is the embodiment of hope. He was the embodiment of hope. And so with his death, I guess hope died in my heart too. I remember the pain in that moment. I still feel that pain. So I'm sorry if I'm not jumping for joy just because you said that Jesus Christ came back from the dead and things are fine. It's a really important detail, right? It helps us to frame what the story is all about, right? It's not simply about like doubting Thomas full stop. It's meant to pose to us a question. What do I do when I perceive a certain tension between what my faith seems to say to me and what my experience seems to say to me? What do I do? Again, what do I do when I perceive a certain tension between what my faith seems to say to me and what my wounded experience seems to say to me? Now, to answer that question, you go back to the gospel, right? So it's all about the details. So again, Jesus Christ appears to the disciples, minus St. Thomas, and then he leaves. And there's Thomas, he's dialoguing with his brethren. And then what happens, before Jesus shows up the second time, 8 days pass. Imagine, 8 full days. You gotta remember, Jesus Christ, his providence, these things are not simply active in terms of explicit moments in time and space. Jesus Christ and his love and his providence, all these things are also active in the waiting, in the passage of time. Because what is happening during those 8 days? They're thinking about these things they have seen and heard. They're thinking about these things, they're bringing them to prayer, they're talking about it. And through that, there's a certain deepening of the experience. And with that, preparation of the heart for that which is to come. And only after those 8 days does Jesus Christ appear. He says to the disciples collectively, peace, shalom, again, things are fine. And then he speaks to Thomas. See my hands. See the mark of the nails in my hands. Put your finger here. And put your hand on my side. Do not doubt, but only believe. Right? No criticism, no condemnation. Just meets him where he's at. taking time to work through all the different contours of his wounded heart, journeying with him to all those dark places in his soul. And so what happens? St. Thomas says, "My Lord and my God." It's the most clear articulation of Christ's divinity on the lips of any disciple. Even St. Peter didn't say that. And the idea is that how did he get to that point? Because he had the courage and the wherewithal to work through all the wounded areas of his heart and his experience with the Lord, with faith and humility and trust. So the takeaway message is that it's not simply okay to process these things with the Lord, it's actually kind of necessary. You see this, for example, when it comes to the Psalms, right? So when you look at the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, there's like the Psalms, basically poems, 150 Psalms. Now, if you know this, but 42% of the Psalms are what's called Psalms of Lament. 40% of the Psalms are Psalms of Lament, otherwise known as Psalms of Complaint. Almost half the Psalms. And they all follow the same pattern. They begin with honesty, brutal honesty about one's experience. I don't like this experience of pain and suffering, and I feel like, Lord, you're not with me. So think, for example, of Psalm 22, the very psalm that Jesus Christ himself quotes on the wood of the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? Brutal honesty about my experience of pain. And then he goes on to enumerate these things. They pierced my hands and my feet, and my bones are exposed, and they cast lots from my garment, right? There's a reason why Jesus Christ quotes that particular psalm, but all these psalms of lament, they always end in the same way, with a sense of trust and abandonment to God and his providence, which speaks us to the fact that working through our painful experience with the Lord in a sense of lament and complaint, it's necessary. That's not simply okay, but it's actually necessary. One final example, I'll end with this. This is kind of a personal example, so as per usual, I'll change the facts to protect the innocent, right? So this involves an elderly priest who back in the day had a vocations crisis. I might have shared with you the story before, but so be it, right? So this elderly priest who was having a vocations crisis back in the day, so he thought, you know what, I feel like I'm about to leave the priesthood. But as one last-ditch effort to salvage his vocation and his ministry, he went on this private retreat. And just imagine the mindset. He had every expectation that at the end of this retreat, I will leave the priesthood. And so as you imagine, honest in prayer, brutally honest, and therefore accidentally fall in the pattern of these Psalms of Lament, right? Naming all these things he hated about his life, his ministry, and so on and so forth. Lord, I hate the bishop. I hate the diocese. I hate my fellow priests. I hate the people of God. They are so annoying. This is not me, this is someone else, right? I'm really frustrated with all these things I'm going through, wall-to-wall stress, loneliness, on and on and on, until I'm done. I've emptied my heart out to the Lord. And at the end, he felt that the Lord was saying to him, yes, but. Yes, but. Like, I hear what you're saying. I feel your pain. I'm with you in that, Emmanuel, right? At the same time, yes, but. Do you believe in me? And do you trust me? And do you love me? And the priest, who was surprised, he was like, actually, yes. I do believe in you. I do trust you. I do love you. And so he continued on, and he's still an amazing priest to this day. I love that story because it speaks to the common human experience, right? Just to call a spade, everyone is afraid of suffering. Everyone is afraid of suffering, but the reality is, your love is greater than your fear. Your desire to suffer with the Lord and for the Lord is actually greater. Your desire to live the courageous life, the heroic life, is actually greater. It might not feel like that, but it's actually true. Christian anthropology, right? It's a variation of what St. Augustine says. The human heart truly is restless until it rests in the Lord. But you have to discover that reality for yourself. discover the thing that was always true, and then own it. And how do you do that? You have the courage to walk through your painful and broken and weary heart with the Lord in a spirit and prayer of lament. Until eventually, in time, in your own way, you too can say to the Lord, my Lord and my God.